Welcome back to another episode of Revealing Biblical Truths. Today we will be discussing the legacy of Nimrod and Ishtar. These two figures of our ancient past have shaped many religions and traditions over the millennia, from Babylon to Egypt to Rome to modern day. Their influence and worship has infiltrated virtually all of society with paganism and symbolism. It's in the media, music, astronomy, religion, government, movies, it's everywhere. But who were they? And how were their legacies manifested today? Nimrod, according to the Bible, was the great-grandson of Noah, the grandson of Ham, the son of Cush. And Cush brought forth Nimrod, and he began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before Yahweh, therefore it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before Yahweh. And in the beginning of his reign was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar. From that land he went to Ashur and built Nineveh, and Rehoboth, Ir, and Calah. Nimrod was the one who actually built the Tower of Babel too. And all the earth had one language and one speech, and it came to be, as they set out from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city, and a tower whose top is in the heavens, to make our name for ourselves, lest we be scattered over all the face of the earth." Then Yahweh came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And Yahweh said, "Look, they are one people, and they have one language, and this is what they begin to do. And now they are not going to be withheld from doing whatever they plan to do." There is a man in Genesis 14 also called Amraphel, who was over the land of Shinar, the same land as Nimrod. And it came to be in the days of Amraphel, the sovereign of Shinar. The book of Yashar, or Jasher, brings more clarity to this character and also Nimrod. And Cush, the son of Ham, the son of Noah, took a wife in those days in his old age, and she bare a son, and they called his name Nimrod, saying, "At that time the sons of men began to rebel and transgress against God. And the child grew up, and his father loved him exceedingly, for he was the son of his old age. And the garments of skin which God made for Adam and his wife, when they went out of the garden, were given to Cush. And Cush also concealed them from his sons and brothers. And when Cush had begotten Nimrod, he gave him those garments through his love for him. And Nimrod grew up, and when he was 20 years old, he put on those garments. And Nimrod became strong when he put on the garments, and God gave him might and strength. And he was a mighty hunter in the earth, yea, he was a mighty hunter in the field, and he hunted the animals and built altars, and he offered up on them the animals before the Lord. And Nimrod strengthened himself as he rose up from amongst his brethren, and he fought the battles of his brethren against all their enemies round about. And the Lord delivered all the enemies of his brethren into his hands, and God prospered him from time to time in his battles, and he reigned upon earth. Therefore it became current in those days, when a man ushered forth that he had trained up for battle, that he would say to them, like God did to Nimrod, who was a mighty hunter in the earth, who succeeded in the battles and prevailed against his brethren, that he delivered them from the hands of their enemies, so that God may strengthen us and deliver us to this day. And when Nimrod was 40 years old, at that time there was a war between his brethren and the children of Japheth, so that they were in the power of their enemies. And Nimrod went forth at that time, and he assembled all the sons of Cush and their families, about 460 men, and he hired also from his friends and his acquaintances about 80 men, and he gave them their hire and went with them to battle. And when he was on the road, Nimrod strengthened the heads of the people that went with him. And he said to them, "Do not fear, neither be alarmed, for our enemies will be delivered into our hands, and you may do with them as you please." All the men that were there were about 500, and they fought against their enemies and destroyed them and subdued them. And Nimrod placed standing officers over them in their respective places. And he took some of the children as security, and they were servants to Nimrod and his brethren. And Nimrod and all the people that were with him turned homeward. And when Nimrod had joyfully returned from battle, after having conquered his enemies, all his brethren, together with those who knew him before, assembled to make him king over them, and they placed a regal crown upon his head. And he set over his subjects and the people princes, judges, and rulers, as is the custom among kings. And he placed Terah, the son of Nahor, the prince of his host, and dignified him and elevated him above all the princes. And whilst he was reigning according to his heart's desire, having conquered all of his enemies around, he advised with his counselors to build a city for his palace, and they did so. They found a large valley opposite to the east, and they built him a large and extensive city, and Nimrod called the name of that city he built Shinar, for the Lord had vehemently shaken his enemies and destroyed them. And Nimrod dwelt in Shinar, and he reigned securely and fought with his enemies and subdued them, and he prospered in all his battles, and his kingdom became very great. And all nations and tongues heard of his fame. And when they gathered themselves to him, and they bowed down to the earth, they brought forth him offerings. And he became their lord and king, and they dwelt with him in the city of Shinar. And Nimrod reigned over all the earth, over all the sons of Noah, and they were all under his control, his power and counsel. And all the earth was with one tongue and union of words. But Nimrod did not go in the ways of the Lord, and he was more wicked than all the men that were before him, from the days of the flood until those days. And he made gods of wood and stone, and bowed down to them, and he rebelled against the Lord, and taught all his subjects and the people of the earth his wicked ways. And Mardon his son was more wicked than his father. And Nimrod reigned securely, and all the earth was under his control, and all the earth was with one tongue and words of union. And all the princes of Nimrod and his men took counsel together, Phut, Mitzrayim, Cush, and Canaan with their families, and they said to each other, Come, let us build ourselves a city, and in it a strong tower, and its top reaching heaven. And we will make ourselves famed, so that we may reign upon the whole world, in order that the evil of our enemies may cease from us, that we may reign mightily over them, and that we may not come to become scattered over the earth on account of their wars. And the building of the tower was unto them a transgression and a sin, and they began to build it. And whilst they were building against the Lord God of heaven, they imagined in their hearts to war against him, and to ascend into heaven. And all the people and their families divided themselves into 3 parts. The first said, We will ascend into heaven and fight against him. The second said, We will ascend into heaven and place our own gods there and serve them. And the third part said, We will ascend into heaven and smite him with arrows and bows and spears. And God knew all their works and their evil thoughts, and he saw the city and the tower which they were building. And God said to it the 70 angels which stood foremost before him, to those who were near him, saying, Come, let us descend and confuse their languages, that one man shall not understand the language of his neighbor. And they did so unto them. So Amraphel was Nimrod. Also, this Tower of Babel story also backs up the flat earth, the biblical cosmology, with a dome over it, because they could actually reach heaven. That's what they were planning to do. And Esau, at that time, after the death of Abraham, frequently went into the field to hunt. And Nimrod, the king of Babel, the same was Amraphel, also frequently went with his mighty men to hunt in the field, and to walk about with his men in the cool of the day. And Nimrod was observing Esau all of the days, for a jealousy formed in the heart of Nimrod against Esau all the days. And on a certain day, Esau went into the field to hunt, and he found Nimrod walking in the wilderness with 2 of his men. And all of his mighty men and his people were with him in the wilderness, but they removed a distance from him, and they went from him in different directions to hunt. And Esau concealed himself for Nimrod, but he lurked for him in the wilderness. And Nimrod and his men that were with him did not know him. And Nimrod and his men frequently walked about in the field at the cool of the day, and to know where his men were hunting in the field. And Nimrod and his 2 men that were with him came to the place where they were, and Esau started suddenly from his lurking place, and drew his sword, and hastened and ran to Nimrod, and cut his head off. And when Nimrod saw the mighty men of Nimrod coming at a distance, he fled, and thereby escaped. And Esau took the valuable garments of Nimrod, which Nimrod's father had bequeathed to Nimrod, and with which Nimrod prevailed over the whole land, and he ran and concealed them in his house. And Esau took the garments and ran into the city on account of Nimrod's men. And he came to his father's house, wearied and exhausted from the fight. And as he was ready to die through grief, when he approached his brother Jacob, and sat before him. And he said unto his brother Jacob, Behold, I shall die this day, and wherefore then do I want this birthright? And Jacob acted wisely with Esau in this matter, and Esau sold his birthright to Jacob, for it was brought about by the Lord. So now we know why Esau sold his birthright. He had killed Nimrod and was scared for his life. Nimrod was known by many names: Ninus, Osiris, Horus, and later Tammuz. His wife, Easter or Ishtar, also have many names, such as Semiramis, Isis, the Queen of Heaven, Diana, Artemis, Venus, and Aphrodite. These are actually mentioned in Scripture. The children are gathering wood, the fathers are lighting the fire, and the women are kneading their dough to make cakes for the sovereignness of the heavens, and to pour out drink offerings to other mighty ones to provoke me. After the death of Nimrod, the story goes that he was reborn on the winter solstice, December 25th, as Tammuz, which again goes back to sun worship. Meanwhile, Ishtar, who was the sex and fertility goddess, is pictured surrounded by a rabbit and eggs symbolizing fertility. Later on, Tammuz is killed by a wild boar, a pig. Ishtar lamented his death and began 40 days of weeping for Tammuz. This is at the same time as the Catholic Lent, and it concludes with a feast to Ishtar or Easter and eating ham to remember Tammuz. The cult of Ishtar and Tammuz also included dipping the blood of sacrificed infants in blood, a ritual that continued into the Catholic Church by dyeing the eggs in red coloring, and now to the modern era by coloring the eggs different colors. It all goes back to worshiping Easter, the fertility goddess. So, both December 25th as well as Easter are pagan in origin and go back to Tammuz and Easter. These days have nothing to do with Yahusha or things we are to observe. In addition, many of the traditions we associate with Christmas are totally pagan. The Christmas tree represents the penis and testicles of Nimrod, whose body was torn apart after his death, and the piece that could not be found was that. Santa, or Old Nick, being Satan, gingerbread men being the child sacrificed to Ishtar, reindeer in the sleigh, the Norse god of Odin, Yah never commanded any of these things, and is disgusted that we keep such things which are so intimately tied to the worship of pagan idols and pagan gods. We should research these things and consider them and how Yah views them. Prayerfully consider removing yourself from these pagan holidays, which are no holidays at all. If you enjoyed this teaching, give it a like and subscribe to my channel. Until next time, Shalom.